Welcome to Lead Your Life, the podcast for people who are seeking harmony in business and in life. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I'm an inner mastery and business mindset coach and the chief igniter here at the Lit Up Life. I feel an urgency to help people let go of past messaging so that they can make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what they value most. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity. It's a place, another land, another time.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I am thrilled today to have two guests, LJ out of California, and Megan, you're in Spokane.
Yes.
Yeah, I should have asked that before we get on, but I thought so, and then I thought, well, I better double check that. So Megan and LJ are with me, and I know both of them because I teach a certificate course at Gonzaga University out of Spokane. It's all online. You don't have to be in a master's program or a PhD program to take this course. And we were having a conversation towards the end of class, and we're like, we need to do a podcast about servant leadership. So that's kind of how this came about. So Megan, I'm going to start with you because just based on where you're at on my screen, introduce yourself to the listeners, tell them what you do and how you show up in the world, and then we'll do the same with LJ, and then we'll get into this conversation.
All right. Well, so I'm Megan. I manage a team at Gonzaga University, and I came to that career path sort of in a winding way, but I've been in and around Jesuit higher education for a lot of my career and had always heard the words servant leadership and seen people walking the walk and had been intrigued by the idea, but I had never really studied it. So I had this opportunity for a professional development course and saw this one, and it just fit perfectly with how I like to approach and like to think I enter the world as a leader. But I wanted to see if I could give myself some foundation in it and really purposefully be a servant leader. So
Yeah,
that's
awesome. Having some mindfulness about it. So
exactly.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to get into that here in just a minute, but I want LJ to also introduce himself. So thank you for that, Megan. LJ, tell us where you come from and what you do in the world.
That's right. My name is Lamai Glenn, LJ for short. I'm a fleet manager here in Los Angeles at Homeboy Industries, a nonprofit organization committed to social justice and equity here in the greater Los Angeles community. And I show up in the world, with a full heart, compassionate, empathetic of, life's human suffering. There's a lot going on in the world today. So I show up with open heart and, just hoping to, inspire and hopefully change how people might perceive certain situations. So my draw to servant leadership was actually by my direct report, Gil, here at Homeboys, who encouraged it and never heard of it before. So I wanted to give it an opportunity, which I have, and here I am today. I'm the servant leader. So I have great examples before me, right, in the classroom. Share space with Megan and others who are very instrumental. And for me, the ultimate servant leader is Father Greg Boyle, who is the founder of Homeboy Industries, Jesuit priest, and he's also a Gonzaga alumni. So that's what brings me here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm so glad to have both of you. And you both kind of talked about what drew you. And as we talked about in the class, we're always a servant leader in training, right? It's a disposition. It's not a style. It's like who you are and how you maneuver in the world, which is why I always ask people, don't tell me necessarily like your job title and everything, but how do you show up in the world, and because how we show up in the world tells a lot about who we are, and then what we do with that is different, right? So when you think about servant leadership, I want to ask both of you this question, so I don't care who goes first. But when you first came into the servant leadership class, what was kind of your thoughts about what a servant leadership was, and how did your view change if it did? And if it didn't, that's fine too. But what changed for you after learning more about particularly the 10 characteristics that Greenleaf or that Dr. Larry Spears took from Greenleaf's writing? Like, So where did you come into the class thinking servant leadership was, and where did you leave the class thinking servant leadership was? LJ, why don't you start us out? Or Megan, you were getting ready to talk. You go ahead.
Well, so I've been thinking about this and anticipating that as a question. And for me, servant leadership has always, in my mind, been very external. How I lead people, how I approach my teams, how I set up procedures for the people around me to succeed, all of those things. But this class really made me internalize things and think about myself as a leader and how I'm feeding myself and filling my cup to be able to serve more. And that, starting with the idea of the growth mindset, it really changed the way that I approach myself as a leader instead of worrying so much about how I lead others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does make it, because one of the key pieces is about realizing that when we heal ourselves, we heal the world, right? Like as we do the internal work, we change the way we show up in the world. And depending on what you like to think of, like vibrationally, our energy shows up different. And then it helps influence those around us, right? So you were talking earlier about you've had some good role models. LJ, you were talking about it too, but you said something about you've seen the walk, right? Like you've seen people walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And that's part of what I mean by that. And so I'm glad to hear that, because I've always said too, my 2.5 year journey into my master's at Gonzaga was one of the most, those 2.5 years, I did more internal examination. Dr. Horsman always says, turn the beam of observation onto yourself, right? Without judgment. And that is exactly what happens. And to me, that's a lot of the essence of a servant leader, is that we turn that lens onto ourselves and say, what can we do? Because really, we don't have any controls and illusions. So when I say control, I laugh anyway, but like, we don't have any control over how other people respond or react to us. We only have control over ourselves. And so how can I show up in a way that, LJ, you were talking about diversity and inclusion, and like, how can I show up in a way that includes people? How can I show up in a way that is heartfelt, that's that showing up in love, right? And so yeah, thank you. That's a really good assessment as far as the internal examination, right? Which is a Jesuit philosophy too.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. LJ, what about you?
So again, right. So conversations with Gil, he talked about servant leadership. I didn't know anything about it, never heard of it. So I did my own research, kind of looked online, and I saw that, servant leadership essentially is, instead of top down, it's bottom up, right? Like it's the idea of, being in leadership, but also uplifting folks, raising, your team up. And which is something I'm about, right? So, based on what I saw, I kind of, sparked the interest in kind of learning more and kind of examining a little bit closer. Then I did some more research, and I looked up, I did some reading on Robert Greenleaf and servant leadership. And, he has a book, I believe, titled The Servant as a Leader.
Yep.
And so that was a little of a throw off, for the simple fact that, there's connotations, for better or worse, to being a servant. I know for myself, when I think of servant, I think of, someone like a butler, or someone that serves you at a table. And as meek and humble as those roles are, unfortunately, as a society, we can kind of frown on those positions, right? Like servants are kind of like discarded, like, hey, give me my food or give me whatever it is I want, and get out of here, unfortunately. So, in that sense, I'm like, well, how can a servant be a leader? But when you kind of think about it, and as I marinated and kind of meditated on it, for those reasons, right? Humility, meekness, the willingness to serve people, the willingness to show up for people. It's a lot we can learn from folks who are servants, and when you translate that in the form of a leadership style, you can see how a servant can be a great leader, right? They're showing up with that humility. And then also looking at a lot of the tenets that we learned in class, the empathy, compassion, healing, stewardship, and so that's what I learned. But similar to Megan, going through the course, I was able to redefined, my outlook on servant leadership. It's not about, how society views a servant, but more so the characteristics that we all can appreciate about the servant, right? Because it does take a genuine meekness and humility to be of service to people, right? So.
Yeah, and LJ, it's interesting that you say that because I think there, kind of two things with that. It takes a large, like I always say, you're eating a big slice of humble pie when you start to look internally. Right? When you're looking internally at yourself, it's about having the humbleness to lower down the ego self to be able to look at what is it that I'm doing that is causing either a positive or negative reaction to this. What can I do to be the change in the world, right? Like, and so about that. Now, meekness also, I think there's some different connotations on that word because sometimes what I find is that people feel like a servant leader is kind of that person that doesn't speak up, right? They're like the Labrador puppy, right? That comes around and they just love everybody, period. Where honestly, the servant leader, although there is a certain level of, I guess for me, I see it as holding space for people. There's also there's a lot of courage in being a servant leader. It's standing up. I think about the recent Episcopalian priest, right? Not talking politics, but that stood up and spoke what she felt was for her, like something that she was asking. And it took courage to do that. Like servant leaders are people that step into the scary, right? They step in to show other people that it's okay to step in behind them, right? Like it's okay to move forward into something that is maybe a little outside the norm, that the courage that it takes to have the tough conversations. I think about servant leaders that I've had in my life, and they're the ones that approach a tough conversation with me and they have the conversation and it's done with a compassion and, to your point, the empathy that it deserves versus trying to tell me how to change, right? They're the ones asking the questions to get me to self-actualize, because there's so much about being a servant leader that allows people to do that internal work and setting up the psychological safety for people to do that. Because a lot of our work environments are not psychologically safe to be able to delve into that work. So folks, we're going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back and dig into a few more concepts that Megan and LJ learned and some of the things that they're applying today from that class. So we'll be right back. I want to give a quick shout out to my favorite online community for women entrepreneurs. It's called BuildHER. If you've craved a space to connect with other women who truly get the journey, this is your space. We go live monthly for in-depth training on all things business, and it's where you'll get the latest news from the lit up life first. Plus a chance to swap stories, tips, and triumphs with an amazing community of women. It's welcoming, it's fun, and it's where we cheer each other on through every up and down of entrepreneurship. Join us and let's build each other up. Check it out at thelituplife.com/BuildHER. We are back and I'm excited because, we left the first segment talking about kind of what Megan and LJ learned from that about, having humility, also being someone that stands up and is courageous. And now I want to ask both of you, and LJ, I'll start with you. What's something that was like an aha for you? You've done some research on servant leadership. You have great models in front of you, Dr. Boyle, all of those people at Homeboys Industry that show up and love. It doesn't mean that they don't get frustrated at times. It doesn't mean that they don't, yell at somebody or whatever, but it's like you've had some of that. What was an aha that you learned during that class? And then we'll go into the application part of it.
An aha. I would say for me the aha was when you kind of touched on it earlier when you said that servant leadership is not a leadership style, it's a disposition. The reason why that was an aha for me is because so many different, I think in so many different ways, right? We can take things and interpret it as a style, right? Like, you can be a traditional type leader and totalitarian leader, You can be a leader in an organization that's old school, right? And these are styles, at least in my opinion. I had a conversation yesterday, right? So when I completed the course and we got the certificate, I posted it on LinkedIn, and a lot of folks were very laudatory of the of me being a servant leader and taking this class, and so I have folks here at Homeboys who does work with our CEO, who's about to be transitioning to a like I guess a senior advisory role because we have a co-CEO model that's going to be taking place here. And well, anyway, she was talking and she said, yeah, she was talking about someone at Homeboys and at the organization, like they're that's his style and servant leadership. I said, no, I wouldn't say that. They're more of a traditional type. That might be the case now, but I said, no, they're more of a traditional leader. Kind of like top, top bottom. What I say goes. Whereas with servant leadership, no, it's not. It's the opposite. It's about uplifting folks. And, like being more inclusive. The person you're talking about, that's more of a traditional type leadership, right? Like I'm the director, I'm the president, I'm the manager, and that's what it is. What I say goes. It's not necessarily always inclusive, and so
Yeah, you made me think of the power over versus power with.
Exactly. So, but I had to point it out. Like, no, I said, no, with servant leadership, it's more so bottom up. Like, what as a manager, as a president, whatever role I'm in, as director, what can I do for you? What can I do for the team? It's selfless.
Yeah.
It's not about me. It's about the greater vision. It's about us. It's about the men and women that I work with, right? The folks that I work with. How can I, elevate you? How can I uplift you? And the conversation went well. And it was like an aha moment for her, the person I was talking to. It's like, yeah, okay. Because the thing is, I had to, instead of just going with the flow of the conversation, like, oh yeah, agreeing, like, no. That's not, that you can't say, that person is a servant leader or that's their style without practice.
Yeah.
And so my aha moment was the fact that it's a disposition. So when I enter the space, I'm, it's not about me saying that, telling people my style of leadership is servant. Like, no, it's like you mentioned, it's a disposition. It's a way of viewing things. It's the way of showing up for folks. It's a way of uplifting. What can I do? How can I be of service to those that I work with? And I'm quick to say, before I pass it, I'm quick to tell people, remind people, like, hey, traditionally people hate bosses. All right, so I notice that I'm a boss, right? Like, like I'm a manager. Like I have a team up under me, so I can easily be hated. So what can I do not to be hated, right? So, so that's where the whole idea of, like, empathy, compassion, having understanding, and like you said, not using the style of servant leadership, but having the disposition to want to be a leader of service to the team.
Yeah, and LJ, you bring up something really interesting, and then Megan, I'll come to you. But in the realm that, and I don't know how much we really talked about this in that certificate course, but a really true servant leader is a disruptor, right? And we're reasonably disturbed, meaning that we're constantly thinking about, well, why is something that way? What if we did this? Where is this? And asking the questions to say, we don't always have to go with just the normal, it brings back a story one time that I use a lot of times, where this woman wanted to learn how her mom made her pot roast. So she went to her house and the mom cut off the ends of the pot roast, put it in the pan and put it in the oven. And she said, Mom, why do you do that? And she goes, well, I don't know. You're going to have to call your grandma and talk to your grandma. So she called her grandma, and her grandma said, well, I didn't have a pan big enough to put the pot roast in. Right. But because she had learned from her mother to cut off the ends of the pot roast, she just stuck it in the bigger pan, but cut off the ends of the pot roast. So a servant leader is someone that is a disruptor and asks the question so that we don't keep cutting off the ends of the pot roast.
That's right.
right? And that's part of what I'm hearing you say that you had with this conversation with your colleagues. So,
And I'm definitely a disruptor.
yeah,
So it fits. It makes sense now. It all makes sense.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Megan, what about you? What was something that you took away from the class that was kind of oh, I hadn't thought about that before?
To be totally fair, one of them was the reasonably disturbed quote that has been in the back of my head forever. Well, since we learned it. Just the questioning things and all of that. But that's not what I had originally planned to say. I think for me, what it was is how universal the application of servant leadership could be. A lot like what LJ was saying, but I felt really fortunate in our cohort that we had corporate, we had nonprofit, we had education, we had all of these different walks of life represented, religious, not religious. We had great examples to discuss and to dig into, and seeing how those core principles of approaching people with a servant's heart and with the best intentions of your team at the core can so easily fit into all of those molds. So that was really fun for me to see. And knowing that I work with young professionals here at Gonzaga that are going to go do everything. You know, my students are not going into education necessarily. They're not all going to be accountants. They're not all going to be lawyers. They're going to be all of those things. So I, as somebody who can have at least a small influence on their life, and this is what I did for my culminating project of winding in the concept of servant leadership into their experience while they're here working and learning, that they can go be an accountant with a servant leadership style. They can go be a teacher and serve their students. They can hopefully incorporate that into whatever they do. And that's, I mean, not to sound cheesy, but that's how you change the world, you know, one person at a time. And that's how you create the type of world that I want to live in, is to have more servant leaders out there.
Yeah. And so Megan, oh, go ahead, LJ.
I was going to say, Megan, we need the next president of be grown by you at Gonzaga. We need
Be a servant leader, yes.
president, governor. We need, yeah.
Yeah. And right now, more than ever, you know, servant leaders are needing to step up, right? And so kind of in that, Megan, you set this next question up really well in the fact that you talked a little bit about how you would apply it, but what are some things that you, when I say immediately, like people were applying things throughout the class. What are a couple of things that, to kind of wrap this up, that you then took from that class and applied into the work that you do today? And then LJ, I'm going to ask you the same question.
Goodness. I think it, more than anything else, the structure that I put together with the team of how we had our meetings changed pretty significantly. I had always been a very agenda-driven boss. You know, you have your to-do list and you check it off. And almost immediately after we started the class, that whole format changed. We still have our agendas, we have our priorities, all of that, but it became much more about what are the priorities in the room? What are things that are impacting the experience people are having in our department right now? And how are we collectively seeing that? So then when you approach it that way, it's more of a solution-driven team, and it's more of a unified group project to make the experience better. So yeah, I would say sort of abandoning that top-down pretty quickly and really focusing on how are we collaborating.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, because a lot of times there are structures, you know, LJ, like you were talking, even other styles, and Megan, like with these agendas, or we do it this way or we do it that way. And it's the pot roast thing again, where it's like, it doesn't, who says, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be done that way. And it's only what we've been modeled. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing, but yeah, thank you for that. That's great. LJ, what about you? What was something that you either applied during the class or after the class that you learned directly from working with your cohort of peers and the material?
I would say there's a few things, but one thing that I think is cool is that, similar to Megan, you know, I'm used to, you know, setting meetings with agendas and kind of the flow of our check-ins or meetings. Now, you know, I've empowered, you know, the team that I work with, which comprises of transportation specialists, and I have a associate that works with me, closely with the vehicles and vehicle management and things of that nature. So I've empowered them, like, hey, you can set the meeting. Like, if it doesn't have to just be me that's setting meeting dates and agendas. Like, you tell me when you want to meet. You guys tell me what you want the agenda to be. Let me know. Like, you come and lead the meeting. Let me sit back and listen. Like, you let me know what the needs are. Like, what are some, like, bring fresh ideas. Like, you feel free to set the meeting, and it'd be honored. Feel free to set the agenda. I'll show up to the meeting. You set the time. Obviously it's a team meeting, but it doesn't have to be, again, to Megan's point, top down. Like, feel free to, like, I'm pretty good at, like, setting the meeting dates and what's important from an organizational standpoint, right? Kind of being the liaison between, leadership here at Homeboys and, what the immediate needs are in our various respective roles as a team. But feel free to let me know. Like, hey, you might say, hey, Lamar, I think we should meet, and these are some of the thoughts that we need to talk about. And so it's very unique, right? Because I've traditionally, in different roles I've been in, whether fleet management, case management, navigation, the meeting was always set by the supervisor, the manager. Whereas I'm encouraging folks, say, hey, you let me know.
Yeah.
You let me know, and you can set the meeting, and you can set the time, and you can set the agenda, and we'll be talking about. Even if it's impromptu, that's fine. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, LJ. And it's interesting because as you're talking about that too, I think back to the healing module, because when we help build other people's confidence and trust in themselves and their ability to make decisions, like, it seems like it's so, like, people would be like, really, this happens? But it's so subtle, right? When we take control over an agenda, even, but when we give open space for people to bring in topics, or we have them conduct the meeting, it builds their confidence level and their trust level in themselves to make decisions, which makes them better servant leaders, which is one of the best tests, right? Am I making better leaders out of people? That's not the exact quote, but and making sure that the least advantage aren't taken advantage of, right? So when we think about that in servant leadership, thank you both for sharing those applications. I want to finish this up and ask you, what is one book for you, and it doesn't even have to be in the last year or two, but that has been really impactful for you that you would recommend to others to read? Megan, let's start with you.
So I always keep going back to Brene Brown. I think they're very consumable books. They're easy to apply. I can see myself in the stories she tells a lot. So I find myself going back to Dare to Lead pretty regularly. It was the first book I read when I got this particular job. So it's sort of the framework that I tried to bring into the team I'm leading right now. So it's definitely, that's one I go back to
Awesome.
more.
Yeah. And Megan, I'm going to ask you this question, and then I'll do the same with LJ too. But if someone wanted to reach out to you and ask you some questions about what you do or what you learned in the class, where would they find you? What's the best place?
So the best place is probably on LinkedIn. It's MP Holly. And I can get that information to you so you can put it wherever it needs to be. But that's definitely the place where I'm the most active.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And LJ, what about you? What's a book for you? And then where can people find you?
For me, it's pretty simple. The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And it's a self-help book, aimed at, providing, wisdom from a Toltec perspective. And, the idea of the book is to, for one, to achieve personal freedom and happiness. So for me, I've always been a fan of the Four Agreements, which is be impeccable with your word. Right. These are things I remind folks when I'm talking to them. I make references to the Four Agreements. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take nothing personal, which is a hard one, which is, I think, a work in progress for many of us, especially, living in the flesh. Don't make assumptions, which is very important. I think we all make assumptions. It's kind of wired in us. So, always, it reminds me of a quote. Well, not a quote, but something someone wise once told me, presume goodwill. So if we're making assumptions, hopefully it's the assumptions and the good intent, right? Because he's to make assumptions in a bad way, and that kind of dominoes into other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the last but not least, the fourth agreement, which is always do your best. So, I'm a huge Kobe Bryant fan. Growing up here in Los Angeles, and he gave us many great years here with the Lakers. And ironically, yesterday was the 5-year anniversary of him and his daughter passing. That tragic airplane crash. Calabasas, and I just think about right, always leaving on the floor, always trying his best, always giving the full effort, which is why for those of us from Los Angeles, maybe you, Debbie, to an extent when you are here in the Pasadena area, like Kobe is revered, like he's revered worldwide, but here in Los Angeles, like he's going to have 3 statues in front of the Staples Center where he won those championships with Shaq and some of the other Laker legends, and 3 statues. So to date he has one. No, to date he has 2. He has one with him and his Lakers. He has a second one with his daughter Gianna, and it's a statue of them sitting courtside, and he kisses her on the head. So,
yeah.
But anyway, always try your best. So that's the book for me. It's been around a while. The 4 agreements. I'm always like harping it, and it's also kind of embedded into the homeboy culture as well. It was one of the foundations of the model, right? The understandings of homeboy industries, and so the 4 agreements by Miguel Ruiz, and I can be found on LinkedIn as well. Pretty active on there, especially in the professional sense. I can be found at Lamai Lami J Glenn GLEN. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm following Megan's great work. I'm following you as well, Debbie. You probably didn't realize that, but I'm a fan of the lit up life. I try to keep it lit myself. So.
Thank you for that. Well, and thank you both for taking time out of your busy day to do this. I so appreciate it. I will say to you, both of those books are phenomenal. And while we're talking books, I'm really big on books, but I have 2. One that I want to kind of tout a little bit with Homeboys Industry. I read the book Tattoos on the Heart, and Father Boyle has a lot of books out, but they're really impactful and they make you think. And then another one that I'm reading right now is called Letting Go. It's been around for a long time with Hawkins. It's a pretty dense book, but as you can see, it's pretty, I've got tabs and writings in it more so than I think when I did my master's. So with that, I could talk books for an hour. Maybe I'll do a podcast on books. That's a good idea. But with that, thank you both for that. If you all too, anyone is interested in learning more about servant leadership, about the certificate program at Gonzaga, look up the Center for Lifelong Learning. It is through that organization. A lot of times too, your organization may, if they have some tuition reimbursement or some personal development dollars, will help with that. And Rochelle and her group there are always super helpful and servant leaders themselves and are willing to help out if you have any questions with that. But with that, folks, it's a wrap. This is Debbie Heiser with The Lit Up Life, and you can find me out in all the social realms as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk again next couple weeks from now. Bye. That's a wrap for this conversation. I'm so glad you've joined us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch all of our future episodes, and visit us at thelituplife.com for details on how you can become part of the Lit Up Life community. A quick shout out to my friend Jackie Wilson and her friends, the creators of our amazing theme music. Thanks so much for allowing us to share this perfect song with our listeners. Looking forward to having you listen in to our next episode.